What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If you've got a question about the Catholic faith, we would love to answer that question just for you, or perhaps you'd like to explain to us, as the lady just said, what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening to us outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. If you're watching us on TV, you can participate as well. The address is ctc@ewtn.com. Love to get your email there, ctc@ewtn.com. Michael McCall is our producer today. Also, we have Matt Kabinski as our phone screener, and Jeff Burson is handling our social media. So if you want to ask a question via YouTube or Facebook, we're streaming there right now. Just ask a question via the comments box. Put it right there. Jeff will see it, and we will take it from there. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing decent, thank you.
Got a very interesting question here from Karina in Virginia. Karina says, I'd really appreciate it if you could help me answer my 18-year-old son's questions. He is struggling with his faith, and this is a big one for him. Here it comes. God must have given the people in the Old Testament free will. They were sinning a bunch, so God wiped them all out. What's different from their free will and our free will? What is stopping God from wiping us all out? We're doing a bunch of the same things that the people in the Old Testament were doing, and God's already broken his own commandment, thou shalt not kill. So why can't God just show himself in general?
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So the premise of the question is that we should take the Old Testament, first of all, as a literal narrative of actual history that would suggest a difference in the way God behaves then from the way he behaves now, and that we should sort of conceive of our moral lives and our relationship to God based on that model. Right? That's actually not the way the New Testament looks at the Old Testament. And beginning in the ministry of Jesus himself, Christ takes a different line in the Old Testament. He takes some of the specific commands, for example, of the Old Testament and says, you know, we're not going to follow these exactly as they're written. There's a higher principle in light of which we should interpret them, namely the principle of love. So, okay. For example, when Moses says that you should stone adulterers, Jesus says, we're not going to do that. We're not going to stone adulterers. Or when the law of Moses says that a man can divorce his wife for any reason, Jesus says, no, you can't. You can't abandon her. The dignity of the woman, you can't treat her that way. And when challenged by his contemporaries, well, then why does the text say that? Christ appeals to a higher principle within the text, namely the creation order, what God has joined together, let man not separate, that kind of thing. And so it suggests, even in Jesus' own teaching, that there's a kind of nuanced, layered way of reading the Old Testament, not taking the reports just at face value the way maybe a fundamentalist would. Now, when St. Paul addresses this, rather than looking at these prescriptions, these laws of the Old Testament, he actually looks at the narratives of the Old Testament, some of these issues that you're talking about. And taken at face value, they would seem to countenance maybe a kind of bloodthirsty approach to sin. So, you know, the law says, for example, that you are to kill Sabbath breakers. And there's ample evidence in the narratives of the Old Testament of those who were wayward in this regard being subject to the death penalty. So St. Paul, taking that quite literally, goes out and tries to kill Christians. He's out executing them for being Sabbath breakers and anything else he thinks they did wrong. Yeah. Then he meets Christ on the road to Damascus and realizes that he's misread the Old Testament. He's misapplied it to his life, and he's come to a complete reevaluation of the way he understands the Bible. And we see that in a couple places in Scripture, in particularly the book of Galatians and also 1 Corinthians. We now find Paul begin to read the Old Testament symbolically and allegorically, and that these narratives are understood as pointing us towards Jesus and not the final word. And so the spiritual reading of the Old Testament and spiritualizing these texts and allegorizing them becomes the Catholic Orthodox approach to the Bible. And so the Church Fathers will do this. So St. Gregory of Nyssa, for example, one of the Cappadocian Fathers, whose was responsible in part for articulating the doctrine of the Trinity and the Holy Spirit, very, very important Church Father, says we ought not to take these things at face value. So, for example, the narrative about God killing all the firstborn of Egypt, he says we shouldn't look at that as a straightforward account of the way God treats babies, but rather as a moral teaching about cutting off the first roots of vice within our souls. A completely different reading, applying it at a different level.
Sure.
So, in other words, I think this question proceeds from an ignorance of the way Catholics handle the Old Testament and the role it's meant to play in Christian life. Now, I don't know how literary your 18-year-old son is, but there's a wonderful book on exactly this topic from the theologian Matthew Ramage called Dark Passages of the Bible. And it applies the hermeneutics of the Church and Pope Benedict and Thomas Aquinas to understanding some of these difficult texts in light of what the Church and tradition teach about the way to assimilate the text into our lives.
All right, and Karina, thanks so much for your email from Virginia. Yeah, speaking of sin, here's one from Tim. Why does the Church seem to make some sins worse than others? Isn't all sin abhorrent to God?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question, because some sins are worse than others. I mean, that's and this is something that you don't have to be a theologian to understand. You know, it is a sin for children to disobey their parents, to be sure. And if I ask my son to do his homework and, instead he runs off and plays video games, well, that's bad. That's not capital murder.
No.
Right? In civil society, we don't act that way. In human relationship, we don't act that way, because we understand that it is possible to offend against the dignity of a person to a greater or lesser degree. Mm-hmm. Stealing their cupcake is not as bad as stealing their life. And the same thing pertains in our relationship to God.
All right, very good. Tim, thanks so much for your email. And again, if you'd like to send us an email for a future show, here's the address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. We would love to hear from you, especially if you're perhaps watching an encore on television and you're thinking, well, how do I get through to that show? Because they're not taking any calls right now. You can always send us that email, ctc@ewtn.com. Now, if you are listening to our live broadcast, we're taking those phone calls right now at 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. In a moment, we will talk to Mary in New Brunswick, Canada. A couple of lines available for you at 833-288-EWTN. It's called To Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Stay with us. It's called Communion here on EWTN. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin today with Mary in New Brunswick, Canada. Hey there, Mary. What's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I am wanting some insight on Ezekiel chapter 33 and starts at verse 10. My responsibility as a parent for my children that I have had lapsed, and so they weren't really properly brought up. They're all baptized but they didn't go to church regularly because I didn't go. But I have since gone back to my faith almost 30 years now and stronger. And they see this, but they're not interested. If I broach the subject of religion with them, they don't want to talk about it. They said, we don't need to go to church. We don't need it. We live a good life, which they do. They're very good children. What is my responsibility? Will I be damned because I am not instructing them, or?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the question. Well, today your children are grown, you told me, so they're no longer under your authority, and you have no obligation to instruct them as if they were little children under your control, right? You just have the responsibility of living a virtuous Christian life and being a light. And it's up to their consciences whether they respond to that light in you or someone else or not. So it's really not on you. And I personally would certainly not hold you responsible for the fact that your children are not practicing the faith. I mean, your question is about every other call on Dr. Ray Garendi's show.
Yes.
When we have these call-in shows on EWTN that are pretty much aimed at families and their issues, and this is more a theology show, but nevertheless, those family shows, I mean, this is the concern, the number one concern of Catholic parents and grandparents today is whether or not their children are practicing the faith, and very often they're not. And as Dr. Ray and Dr. Popchak will tell you, even really bad Catholic parents didn't have this problem to the same extent 50, 60, or 100 years ago, because they didn't have the culture working at such cross purposes to them,
Sure.
right? And my own private opinion, you're welcome to disagree with me, is that the average American today just has so many different things vying for their attention. And so many of them are flashy and salient and attractive. And let's be frank. I mean, Catholic homilies are boring. I mean, they just, it's not going to compete with Netflix, and other things that pretend to transcendence. And so right away they find themselves in the position of having to pick and choose and select elements of their identity and their groups that they're going to associate with in ways that would have been unthinkable previously. And then there's this full-out assault on Catholicism and its place in history that we find in the schools and in the politics and in media and entertainment and so forth. And even the best-meaning parents it's very difficult to compete with that. And also, I would like to suggest that just because a parent, in fact, takes their child to Mass every week and makes sure to teach them the catechism and all of that, that's no guarantee that the children will continue to go to Mass. I can't tell you the number of cases that we know of people around, talking to EWTN. Well, that's exactly how they raise their kids, and yet it still didn't stem the tide of this flow out of the church. And I can show you other stories of parents who took a much more laissez-faire approach to their children's religious upbringing, and for some reason, something about the faith stuck, and those kids are practicing and flourishing. So I just don't think it's fair to pin the whole thing on the parents right now. And I would, the fact that your kids are in some respects thriving, as you suggested that they are, suggests that you did a lot of things right. And I would give yourself a little pat on the back.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to damnation, which is the question that you raised, we are only saved or damned based on one thing, and that is whether we die with the grace of God in our souls. And if we have done something gravely wrong in our past, there is a remedy for that, and that is confession.
Yeah.
Even if the effects of some past sin perdure into the future, provided that we repent and are reconciled to God, it's not credited to our account. We're forgiven.
And there it is. Mary, thanks so much for your call. And David, you are so right about what I would call the tsunami of distraction that comes at us in, it seems like waves of it. And, I'm sure you've dealt with this in your own family. We certainly have. And it's, there's only so much a parent can do.
Well, I deal with it. I mean, I'm distracted.
Sure.
And I have to take serious steps to keep my head in the game because it's so easy to get your head out of the game these days.
It is called communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. If you call right now, we can probably get you on today's program. 833-288-3986. Interesting question here from Joe in Pennsylvania. God chooses us to bring about the incarnation in an era of fragile papyrus and parchment paper. Makes me wonder how completely God's revelation was captured. The Bible wasn't completed until the 4th century, and much of the early writings were lost due to Christian persecution. So, how can we be sure that we got the complete intended revelation in light of this sort of fragmented history?
Yeah, thanks. Don't you think God knows about fragmented history? Don't you think God's in control of history? Does God know where the fragments are? And for that matter, is this how we really know the will of God? Do we know through the discipline of archaeology? Are we really dependent on archaeologists and biblical textual critics in order to reconstruct what God sort of offhandedly dropped down 2,000 years ago and then forgot about? That's not the way the Catholic Church understands it. Jesus Christ is the definitive revelation. Jesus Christ, not some crackly papyrus that got, dropped by the Sea of Galilee and forgotten. But Jesus Christ is the definitive revelation of God. And did Jesus make provision for handing on the totality of his teaching, all that he wanted to be known and proclaimed in his name? He did. Now, did he write it on a crinkly old papyrus and bury it in a cave? No, he did it by founding a church. He did it by founding a church. And he said, go into all nations, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them everything I've commanded you, and I will be with you until the end of the age. So we have Christ's promise of divine assistance, a guarantee. Whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. The gates of hell will not prevail. And that church is still here. The lights are on. Here we are.
Yes,
Catholic
indeed.
Church still going 2,000 years later. And what divine institution guarded the sacred texts of the Holy Scriptures and compiled them and promulgated them to the world and said, these are the list. This is the list. These are the ones you need to know. Again, it was the church founded by Christ, the Catholic Church. So that's how we know.
That's how we know. Joe in Pennsylvania, thanks so much for your question. A real quick one here as we're going to break. Jane says, why is it so important that Mary remained a virgin? Are all women who aren't virgins less than?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I appreciate the question. So first of all, with regard to the second question, women who aren't virgins are not necessarily less holy in not being virgins. Okay, so sanctity is fulfilling your duties according to your state of life. So if you are a married person and a mother, for example, you can rise to the heights of holiness by fulfilling the duties of your state of life as a married person. If you are a consecrated virgin, you grow to the heights of holiness by fulfilling the duties of your state of life as a consecrated virgin. Now, is one state of life objectively more in conformity with the total consecration of our life? Yes, that would be virginity. Consecrated virginity and religious life are objectively better, but not subjectively better for every soul.
All right.
So it's not everyone's vocation.
Thanks for clearing that up. In a moment, we'll be talking with Lee in Kenosha, Wisconsin, also David in Duluth. Lots more straight ahead on Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders. Hey, glad you're with us for Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. A little shout out here. Several of our EWTN radio family members celebrating their anniversaries this week. That would be Prince of Peace Radio in Palm City and Stuart, Florida. They are celebrating 15 years on the air with EWTN. Also KFIP, which sounds really good, 107.3 FM on the Big Island of Hawaii, celebrating 5 years of great Catholic radio with EWTN. So congratulations to all of you. Back to the phones right now. Here is David in Duluth, listening on the great Real Presence Radio. David, what's on your mind today, sir?
Well, what a real privilege to be on the show. I want to say that your promo that the two of you air is spot on. And I'm living proof of that because it was someone across your show, I would say, oh boy, three to 4 years ago that led me to commence RCIA that year. And we'll get to the heart of the question. I thought it was really, I had to drop out due to circumstances that year. I actually attended Dr. Anders came here to do a Real Presence radio fundraiser.
I remember that.
Because it was just great. And then the following year, I had the luxury of eating hamburgers with Tom and his family.
Wow.
Here in Duluth. That was just great. But you guys are just really the impetus for my for my ongoing pursuit of joining the church. My question is this. So I am not a baptized individual. I'm not a Catholic yet. I have not resumed RCIA since then. I intend to as soon as it starts up this fall. My predicament is this. I'm 40. I just turned 43, 2 days ago, and my dad is my one living parent, and he's a very, very a man of a strong faith. But certainly not Catholic, and I have a strong desire to be baptized. I actually am still trying to get over some stinking, persistent illness that I've had since the spring. But that's beside the point, I guess. But my dad is holding a retreat with a small group of his non-church folks, really great group of people this weekend.
So David, how can we help you today?
Well, thanks for reeling me in. Because I would prefer to be baptized in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I know that baptism is valid regardless of who does it. So that would be my question. I have an opportunity to be baptized by someone other than a priest, but I would, and I'm just looking for any advice.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I really appreciate the question. So if your intent is to enter the Catholic Church and be fully initiated and you're going to join RCIA, then I would put off baptism until you are received into the church at Easter. It's more appropriate to receive it from a minister of the Catholic Church in the Catholic Church, ordered towards your full inclusion, reception of Holy Communion and confirmation. So that's definitely the way I would do it. And if you're a catechumen, if you enter the ranks of the catechumens, you are in an order that is part of the Catholic Church. So your Catholic life begins. It's just the life of a Catholic catechumen. You shouldn't think of yourself as outside the church. You're just not fully initiated, but you're in a stable order within the church, namely the order of catechumens. And that means that God's grace is already at work in your life, and he's drawing you ever more deeply into relationship with him. So you don't need to worry or scruple about that at all. And I can appreciate your father's faith and his tradition and his friends and their retreat, but I would not do this just out of deference to family. I would really want to do it in a way that would most build up your faith. I also will never forget that trip to Duluth, Minnesota, because I discovered that it is not always easy to land a plane in the airport in Duluth in the middle of the winter. We, after changing planes in Minneapolis and many hours on the road, it looked about 10 feet away from the runway, and they wouldn't let us land. We took off and went to Grand Forks, North Dakota.
Wow.
And then back to Minneapolis, where we landed, spent the night, couldn't take off the next day, got in a car, rented a car at exorbitant, usurious prices, drove to Duluth and got there, I think, about 5 minutes before my first engagement. So I'll never forget that trip.
But what a great town it is.
Oh, I enjoyed it very much.
Very, very nice. David, thanks so much for your kind words, and thanks for listening to EWTN's Call to Communion. All right, back to the phones now for Lee in Kenosha, Wisconsin, listening on the great WSFI. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
This is Larry. Are you talking to Lee?
Looks like Lee in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Is that you?
Well, this is Larry.
Very good. What's on your mind today, Larry?
My mind is on Acts chapter 10, verses 25 and 26. When, not why, but when did they start bowing down before the popes and kissing his ring? Because Peter forbid it.
Yeah, thanks. Probably, I'm not sure about this, but probably the 4th century is my guess, because that's when elements of the imperial protocol began to be incorporated into the Catholic liturgy.
Okay. There you go.
So, yeah, there you go.
Larry, thanks so much for your call. Here is Jana now in Boise, Idaho, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. And Jana, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. My question has to do with the 7th commandment, which is do not take the Lord's name in vain.
Mm-hmm.
And I was raised in the Baptist church. I'm not Catholic, but I was taught to never say, oh, my God, as like a expression or a swear or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I hear a lot of Catholics say this. And so I guess what truly is taking the Lord's name in vain? Not that I want to, but I just need some clarification.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So, while we're sitting here talking, I was hoping to flip through the catechism and actually turn to the section on the 2nd commandment, but I'm not going to be able to pull it up in time.
While you're
generally speaking, I mean, the idea here is that God is to be reverenced above all things.
Sure.
And, St. James tells us that the way we use our tongues has deep moral significance. And so both for our own edification and that of our neighbors, St. Paul says, don't say anything except as it will build others up according to their needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so if your language leads either yourself or someone else into essentially treating God with impunity or taking him for granted in some way or not honoring him, then that would be wrong. I would hesitate personally to spell out, here is the list of things you can or cannot say, because I think it more goes to the virtue, a disposition in the will, rather than simply a prohibitive list of texts that I should or should not enunciate, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Jana, thanks so much for your call. Someone that we talk about quite a bit on this program is our mutual friend, Bob Lujano, who was born without arms and legs. Long story short, he has competed with Paralympics, doing wheelchair rugby, a phenomenal athlete. They made a film of that aired years ago, and my wife and I noticed that all these other athletes were taking the Lord's name in vain, but Bob didn't. And we asked him about that, and he said, I understand what they're doing, but I choose not to do it. And so it goes exactly to that seventh commandment, doesn't it?
It sure does. So while we were talking, I pulled up the Catechism reference on the second commandment. It says a number of things. All of them are worth taking a look at. And many go to the points I was making about really it's kind of a disposition of the will. But specifically, it says that the second commandment forbids the abuse of God's name, every improper use of the names of God, Jesus Christ, but also of the Blessed Virgin Mary and all the saints.
There it is. Spelled out for you there. Jana, thanks again for your call. Let's go right now to Susan. Susan is in Virginia, listening on the EWTN app, a free download for you. Hey there, Susan. What's on your mind today?
Hi, and I wanted to say thank you so much. I really appreciate your show. My own question is regarding, I have a family member, my sister, who is an evangelical and has been really since about college years. And I'm just wondering, what are some good ways to witness to her when we have tried to dialogue? I've tried to ask sincere questions to find out her beliefs, and I've kind of realized more recently she's not just evangelical, she's actually fundamentalist. And so when we've tried to dialogue, it hasn't gone very well, because when she's asked me questions and I've tried to give an answer, I get this very antagonistic, cutting apart my answer. So I don't feel like there's an openness on her part, and I understand that. So I'm praying for her, but I wonder if you have any other suggestions.
Yeah, I sure do. I appreciate the question. First of all, and I mean this quite seriously, get her to call me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to talk to her. Or, if you get her to listen to my show, I'd love that. So sometimes you can get somebody else to kind of do this for you, and you preserve your own relationship, right? But I'd love to be involved any way I can. Secondly, it sounds like you want to have a good relationship with her. In most respects, you do have a good relationship with her. So that's the most important thing. You living your own faith with integrity and charity and being a light. Jesus tells us to be lights and doesn't say we should be sledgehammers. And so exhibiting the truth of the faith that we profess is vastly more important than any particular argument we might articulate. I have family members that when I became Catholic were very upset about it and didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to hear my reasons, just wanted to be antagonistic. And so we kind of agreed to not talk about it for a while, sometimes years. And then eventually had an opportunity to open up and discuss things. And there are, many times fundamentalists who go after Catholics, they start with some premises that, if you can control the premise of the argument, you can control the outcome. And the premises usually are that the Bible is the sole rule of faith, and that the Bible is literally true in all it affirms in a way that is fully consistent and coherent, such that you can just line up biblical texts in order, arrange them systematically, and voila, you have the sum total of Christian content, Christian doctrine. And then if you grant those premises, well, I don't think you get to every Protestant belief, but you surely exclude some Catholic beliefs if you start that way. So whenever I dialogue with Protestants, I never want to concede that part of their argument. I never want to start with the premise that somehow the way to get to the content of Christian faith is to start with the Bible as they understand it. That's to give away the game before I've started. That's to beg the question.
Yeah.
And so I personally like to kind of prod at that premise Because generally, your typical fundamentalist has never questioned it. It's never crossed their mind that there could be another way to think about the Bible or to think about the content of Christian faith. So sometimes it takes them a while to get their head wrapped around it. But I'll ask questions like this. Did Jesus provide an authoritative means for us to know the content of Christian faith? Did Jesus provide any authoritative means for us to know the content of Christian faith? Because, see, their assumption is that the authoritative means is the Bible. But by making it about Christ's own agency, oh, well, you think that this is the Bible. Like, well, did Jesus indicate the Bible? Oh, well, yeah, he quoted this Old Testament verse. Well, that's very interesting, but the Bible's a lot bigger than that. It includes 27 New Testament books. Did Jesus ever quote those? No, why not? Well, they were all written after he ascended into heaven. So where'd you get the New Testament from? And then well, the apostles wrote it. Well, how do you know that? Well, the book says so, and why should you trust it? You see, you can begin to kind of poke at that, and what you come to realize is that, well, the only way you can get the Bible in the first place is because it's a product of sacred tradition. But furthermore, not only can you not get to the Bible without sacred tradition, Jesus never indicated that the Bible as such is to be the rule of faith. Rather, he gave us the teaching church. Go into all nations, making disciples, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, and I'll be with you to the end of the age. He actually gives us the authority of the apostles, their successors, promise of divine assistance. Whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth is loosed in heaven. Whoever hears you hears me. Doesn't say a word about the New Testament, not a word about the Bible, but rather the teaching church as his authorized instrument to hit on the Christian faith. So that's one line of attack that I'll often take. Another one, this actually persuaded a friend of mine to become Catholic, one of those relatives that didn't want to talk to me. I said, so-and-so, you're Protestant, that's right. You believe in the Bible alone, that's correct. How do you know the difference between dogma and opinion? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, a dogma is something that all Christians have to believe, like the Trinity. Opinion, we can disagree, it's all right. How do you know the difference? What's a dogma, what's an opinion? And he went, And 6 months later, he was Catholic. Because if you think about it, there's no principled way to answer that question from within the framework of the Bible alone. Because here's what happens. A Protestant might say, well, the dogmas are the essential things. Well, that's just semantic. How do you know what the essential things are? Oh, well the essential things, they're the ones that pertain to salvation. How do you know it pertains to salvation? And the history of Protestantism is littered with inconsistencies on this question. I'll give you an example. In the 16th century, every major Protestant thinker taught that the nature of Christ's presence in the Eucharist was an issue that was determinative for salvation. If you got that wrong, you went to hell. Luther thought that. Calvin thought that. Zwingli thought that. They all thought it. And yet they all disagreed on what the nature of Christ's presence in the Eucharist was. Now, my point here is not that they disagreed about the Eucharist. It was this. All of them said you had to get the Eucharist right or you were going to hell. Today, almost no evangelical Protestant would say that. So it's not just a question about Christ's presence in the Eucharist. It's a question about how do you know what counts as a dogma? How do you know what pertains to salvation? How do you know what's central? How do you know what's essential in the Christian faith? The Bible itself cannot, does not, will not answer that question for you.
So there it is. And Susan,
you've got to have the authority of the Catholic Church to answer that question.
Yeah. Susan, thanks so much for your call. And do take David's recommendation. Ask your sister to give us a call.
Call us.
Love to talk with her.
Tell them I need a really good fundamentalist to show me where I'm wrong. She could be the one for the job.
I like that. Call to Communion here on EWTN. If you're looking for real news and not fake news, may I recommend Catholic News Agency, CNA. It's available for you right now by going to CatholicNewsAgency.com. It's an online service from EWTN News. And right now you can get timely news updates going directly to your email inbox. How about that? Visit EWTN.com, click on the word subscribe, and we will take it from there. Bill's listening to us in Cocoa, Florida, via the great Divine Mercy Radio. Bill, what's on your mind today?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I want to ask a question about what the doctor has quoted from the Bible a couple of times today, and that is Jesus said, I'm with you until the end of the age. And my question is, what did he mean by the end of the age? Now, St. Paul, I believe there's evidence to suggest that he thought that Christ was going to return within his lifetime because he didn't want to get married because he was expecting the return of Jesus. And the Catholic Church, to this day, I believe, in the Mass says Christ will return again. So my question to the doctor is, did they expect Christ's return in the age of Paul when he was preaching? Number one. Number two, what is the Catholic Church position on the end of the age, and what do they believe that means, the end of the age, and what do they think that'll happen?
Sure. Yeah,
right.
I appreciate the question. So in the Old Testament, 8th century prophets, you begin to get hear an idea about a coming day of the Lord when the Lord will mete out judgment on Israel's enemies. And as you move through the prophetic literature, there's more and more specificity about what that looks like until you arrive at the book of Daniel, chapter 7. And then this coming day of the Lord when God will mete out judgment is, well, apocalyptic. It's cosmic, and it accompanies the establishment of a new kingdom with one like a son of man who will rule over the nations. And so this way of conceiving of history as this grand battle between the forces of God and the forces of evil that comes to a climactic conclusion at the end of time and the establishment of a new kingdom ruled by one like a son of man is what biblical scholars call apocalyptic. That genre of sort of, earth-destroying, end-of-time conflict of good and evil literature is called apocalyptic. Mm-hmm. And apocalyptic absolutely pervades the consciousness of the New Testament. So Jesus not only talks about this coming kingdom of God and the one like a son of man, we know who that is, who's going to rule the nations, but he also ties it to a future point when there will be signs in the sun and moon and stars shaken and so forth. So Luke 21, there'll be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars and the earth, the distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring, and men's heart failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. I mean, that's the words of Christ in Matthew 21. So clearly, these are apocalyptic texts. Jesus was pointing to a conclusion to history that would come with signs and wonders at some point in the future. I think the most reasonable way to understand Christ's promise about until the end of the age is until this coming of the Son of Man and these apocalyptic signs. I believe that's what he means. I have heard opponents of clerical celibacy argue that Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 is not for today because, Paul obviously expected the imminent end of time and he was wrong, and therefore, since daily life continues, la-di-da, we don't actually have to hold to his teaching about clerical celibacy or celibacy in general being the suitable state of life. I don't find that argument compelling, and when you read what Paul says about celibacy, it's evident that he actually has the form of life itself in mind as the more appropriate way of being in the world. Mm-hmm. And yes, this world and its desires are passing away, but that's true for all of us.
Sure.
I mean, whether Christ comes tomorrow or not, I'm passing away pretty quick. I've crossed the halfway point, and I feel more passing away every day, right? And a man's mind, turns to things of heaven more when that sort of thing happens. That's always been the case, always will be the case, whether or not Jesus comes back tomorrow. Did Paul think that Christ would return in his lifetime? No way for me to know that definitively. Do I find that credible? Do I find that plausible? Yes, I do. And Christians have often lived people between the times with a keen awareness that Christ could come back at any moment and that we should arrange our lives accordingly. And isn't that what Jesus tells us to do? You do not know the time or the day or the hour when the Master will return. So don't be like the foolish virgins who didn't trim their lamps and have enough oil and they were caught unawares. That seems to be the state of mind that we are all to live in, with a consciousness of the short number of our days and the possible return of Christ.
Be ready. Bill, thanks so much for your call. Here is Eric now in California, listening on Sirius XM, Channel 130. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today, sir?
Eric, we're talking?
Eric, go right ahead.
Yeah, no problem. So just a fast question. My church lately, after the sending forth, peace be with you, and that type of stuff, excuse me, before the priest leaves, we do a prayer to St. Michael's.
Okay.
And it's the, get the devil out prayer, kind of. And I find it discerning, kind of off-putting a little bit, because here's this the end of the Mass, and it's a time to go forth and be joyful. Now we're talking Satan and all his works.
Sure, I can answer that. Right. So this tradition was instituted by Pope Leo XIII, who wrote the St. Michael prayer and actually commanded that it be recited at the end of Mass by Catholic churches throughout the world. Now, that's no longer liturgically required, and so churches don't have to do that, but it remains a pious practice that many of the people of God like to do. And it has papal sanction behind it, and a good more than 100 years of history behind it, because we are going forth into the world into a spiritual battle, for our own souls and the souls of our neighbors, and the devil would like to destroy that work. So that's why.
There you go. Eric, thank you so much for your call. Hope that's helpful for you. Cody's watching us on YouTube. Cody says, "What is the ordinariate?"
Yes, that is a special canonical structure that Pope Benedict established that allows Anglicans, Protestant Anglicans, to enter the Catholic Church sort of in groups and to retain elements of their Anglican patrimony. So they have their own churches, they have their own ordinary, that is a bishop who governs their parishes and their affairs, and they have a Roman Rite liturgy that has been altered a little bit for Anglican sensibilities, retains some of that sort of language and spirit, although it's fully Catholic in form. And many of these ordinary churches are quite beautiful, and they are a great boon to the church. So if you're Anglican and you want to become Catholic, you can, even if you're not Anglican, you can still go to an ordinary church. I've been to them. But, hey, if you're an Anglican priest and you're kind of feeling a little bit uncomfortable, maybe should have a conversation with the ordinariate about bringing your congregation with you.
Yeah, give it some thought. Well, very good. Thank you for that question. Could not get to Michael, one of our callers. Also couldn't get to Caitlin in Buffalo, New York. If you folks would call us tomorrow or the day of your choice, we'll get you on the air just as quickly as we can. Dr. David Anders, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
We do this program Monday through Friday on EWTN Radio at 2 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of our great team here, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.